Good evening. Today is Monday, July 13th, 2020. I'd like to welcome everyone to our Board of Education meeting, and we to begin by calling the meeting to order. The time is 6 p.m. Now I ask that everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Good evening. Today is Monday, July 13th. Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to item number 3, appointment of district clerk. Could I have a motion? Resolve that Anthony Sinaccio be appointed as the district clerk effective July 1st, 2020.
Motion.
Motion by Olive, second by Janine Lundgren. All in favor?
Aye. Patty, aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion is carried.
I'm sorry. Do we have everybody?
We do. We have 7 people here this evening, 7 board members. I'm going to move on to item number 4, oath of office for new board members. I'd like to administer the oath of office to the newly elected board members, Margie Venzel and Christine Shea. So if you could both repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York,
I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of a board member of the Marcellus Central School District according to the best of my ability.
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of a board member of the Marcellus Central School District according to the best of my ability.
Thank you both, and congratulations, and welcome, Christine.
Thank
Welcome
you.
back, Margie.
Thank you.
Going to move on to item number 5, election of president. I will now request nominations for the office of president of the Board of Education.
I'd like to nominate Mike McAuliffe as president.
I'll second it.
Okay, are there any other nominations? Okay, resolved that the Board of Education elects Michael McAuliffe to serve as president of the Board of Education for the 2020-2021 school year. I have a motion and a second. We have on here a roll call, so I'm going to read off your name. If you could just cast your vote, either as an aye or a nay, starting with Michael Bristol.
Aye.
Janine Lundgren.
Aye.
Michael McAuliffe.
I abstain.
Kelly Rossiter.
Aye.
Patty Sager.
Aye.
Christine Shea.
Aye.
And Margie Benson.
Aye.
Congratulations, Michael. You have been elected president of the Board of Education for the 2020-2021 school year.
Congratulations.
I'd like to move on to item number 6, election of vice president. Could I, yeah, she had it further down the agenda, but yeah, if we can, I'll turn the meeting over to the newly elected president, Michael McAuliffe.
At this time, election of vice president. At this time, I will entertain nominations for the office of vice president of the Board of Education.
I nominate Patty Sager for vice president. Second.
At this time, I will read board members' names just as Tony did, and if you would, after I read your name, if you would vote accordingly. This is for Patty Sager for vice president. Michael Bristol.
Aye.
Janine Lundgren.
Aye.
Michael McAuliffe. Aye. Kelly Rossiter.
Aye.
Patty Sager.
Abstain.
Christine Shea.
Aye.
And Margie Venzel.
Aye.
Patty Sager was elected vice president of the Board of Education for the 2020-2021 school year.
Congratulations, Patty. Congratulations.
Congratulations,
Thanks, guys.
Patty. Oath of office.
Okay, I'd like to administer the oath of office to Michael McAuliffe and Patty Sager. Would you please repeat after me? I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York,
I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York.
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of President/Vice President of the Marcellus School District according to the best of my ability.
And I will faithfully discharge the duties of Vice President of the Marcellus School Board best according to my abilities.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 8, appointment of officers. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following appointments for the 2020-2021 school year. You can see those appointments listed before you, 1 through 7. Do I have a motion? Janine? Second?
Second, Kelly.
Any discussion? All those in favor, as you vote, please state your name and how you are voting.
Margie, I.
Patty, I.
Janine, aye. Kelly, aye. Christine, aye.
Mike, aye.
Michael, aye. Carried. Appointment of external auditor. Resolved that the Board of Education appoints Grossman St. Amour CPAs, LLC external auditor for the 2020-2021 school year. Do I have a motion?
Can we have a discussion about that or no?
After we have a motion in a second.
Motion, Kelly.
Second, Patty.
Discussion. Questions?
So how do we go about choosing this, and do we go and get bids from other accounting firms?
So Mike, we generally issue an RFP every 5 years, and this would be the final year of our relationship with Grossman St. Amour. And we actually have a request into the OCM BOCES to include us in their RFP process that's coming up this year.
And is it standard all schools do the 5-year, or is that something that we just decided to do?
That's a general rule. There's a 5-point plan from the Office of the State Comptroller that requires that districts issue an RFP at least every 5 years, and generally that's what school districts do.
Okay.
Any other questions? Discussion? All those in favor?
Janine,
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Kelly, aye. Christine, aye.
Michael, aye.
Mike, aye again.
Opposed? Carried. Item 10, appointment of financial advisor. Resolved that the Board of Education appoints fiscal advisors and Marketing Inc. as the Marcellus Central School District's financial advisor for the 2020-2021 school year. Do I have a motion?
Motion, Janine.
Janine,
Second, Kelly.
second Kelly. Questions or discussion?
So Tony, I guess the same question. Is that also an RFP process?
Not typically. So we did, I believe if I remember correctly, we did seek proposals from, there are really 2 primary firms in all of upstate New York. And from what I can recall, roughly 5 or 6 years ago, we did put out an RFP and did retain fiscal advisors after we went through that process. I think the question was also asked at the time, how much do we pay our fiscal advisor? At that time, it was roughly $2,000 to $2,500 per year. There are some additional disclosure requirements that we are required to follow as of the last 3 or 4 years that have increased the amount we do pay those folks. But I guess generally to answer your question, it would be at the request of the board, but otherwise we tend to retain the same fiscal advisor year after year.
And what exactly do they do? Who are they giving advice to, and what exactly is the advice? And are you able to say, no, I want to do something different, or we don't think that that's the best choice, or how does that go about?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So, so as you know, we do issue bonds periodically. So, for example, we just finished issuing bond anticipation notes for $8 million that sold for, I think, 0.609%. And so fiscal advisors actually takes us through that process of selling those bond anticipation notes. That's their primary function. What they may also do for us, you know, say we have an issue that comes up with tax cap compliance, or we are putting together a long-range forecast for capital improvement projects. That's their area of expertise, and we do need to retain those services. It's not really optional, and there are certifications that are required through the Securities and Exchange Commission that we just simply can't perform those services on our own.
So are we required to have a financial advisor?
We are required to have a fiscal advisor.
And
So
do they also serve all the teachers, like the teachers union, or how does that work?
No, they're strictly for our own use for, as I said, issuance of bonds or notes,
Okay.
and periodically consulting services. It's not very often that we use those services. We will use them in the planning phase of a capital improvement project to make sure that our aid projections are accurate and that we're in fact able to borrow the money. There are debt limits that we're subject to, and they monitor those sorts of things for us as well.
So it's that standard one time a year fee, and then there's hours built in off of that, depending on how much we need them?
Correct. Yeah, there is really no one-time or retainer fee. It's just a pay-as-you-go sort of service.
Well, I thought you said something like $2,500 or something, or per year.
Yeah, so that's roughly what we spend. So the continuing
okay.
disclosure requirement is, I think that's roughly $1,500. And then we do renew bond anticipation notes for our school buses. And that's going to be in the $800 range. And then periodically, as I said, throughout the year, there may be some other time that we use them for filing final cost reports, I guess, for a building project would be an example. But it's, yeah, they're you know, retained for our use as we need them. And we tend to be pretty, you know, just like use of attorney time. We really only call them when it's absolutely necessary, just to avoid spending any money frivolously.
Gotcha. Okay.
Any other questions in regards to the fiscal advisors?
Nope.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Patty, aye.
Margie, aye.
Jean, aye.
Michael, aye.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? And carried. Item 11, other appointments. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following appointments for the 2020-2021 school year. You see those appointments listed in the agenda 1 through 27. May I have a motion?
Motion to me.
Me. Second.
Kelly, second.
Questions or discussion in regards to the other appointments?
I just had a question like that. Are these all the same from year to year? Or some of these they look new to me, and I don't know if it's just because I forgot since last time we did this, but are there new things on this list?
The only new thing is the data protection officer, and we actually appointed a data protection officer partway through last year because it was required. And we said at the time that we would add that to our reorg meeting so that it was done with all the other required appointments.
Right. I remember that.
Any other questions, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Patty, aye.
Margie, aye.
Michael, aye.
Kelly, aye.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? And carried. Item 12, designations. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following designations for the 2020-2021 school year. You can see those listed on the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Patty, I'll move.
Kelly and Patty, second. Questions or discussion? Tony, I have a question. Number 2 here, maximum amount permitted to be held at depository, 25. Am I reading that correctly? 25 billion?
Yeah.
What is that and what does that mean?
So we simply need your approval to hold money in a bank up to a certain amount. And you know what, why, I'm not sure, but you are required to specify a threshold. And Faye, I believe we had to increase this amount a few years ago, just at the recommendation of one of our auditors. We hadn't changed that figure at all. Apparently at some point during the course of that school year, we exceeded the authorized level. And so we did bump that up to 25 million. So take, for example, a capital improvement project. There's a great example. So as I mentioned, we issued bands for $8 million for this project. So we have a lot of money dumped into our account all at once. And so with our last project, that was 17.5 million. We would have issued bands for, I think we issued that in 2 chunks. But at one time, we would have had just about that amount of money in the bank just for a capital improvement project. So that's just how much money we can hold in a financial institution. Yeah.
Typically, I mean, other than like a building project, do we come close to that?
No, the peak without absent a building project might be around 9 million. And that would be generally during tax collection time. So, you know, if our property tax levy is $17 million, when we start that process in September and end in November, we have payrolls and other bills that we're paying in between, but roughly $9 million would be the peak.
Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye, me. Kelly, aye. Christine, aye.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Michael, aye.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 13, authorizations. Resolved that the Board of Education authorizes the following for the 2020-2021 school year. You can see those items on the agenda. May I have a motion?
Christine,
Christine. Second.
I'll second it, Patty.
Mart,
Any questions or discussion on authorizations? All those in favor?
Kelly, aye.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Christine, aye.
Michael, aye.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 14, appointment of the Committee of Special Education. Resolved that the Committee on Special Education for the 2020-21 school year be appointed as follows in accordance with the provision of Education Law, Section 4402, to ensure timely evaluations and placement of students. May I have a motion?
Christine,
Christine, second.
Kelly,
Kelly, questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Kelly, aye.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Didn't we skip the preschool schedule and then we jumped down to 4402 down here? We're on 14 right now. Yeah. So we said 40. Sorry, I read that. Name, aye.
Michael, aye.
Christine, aye.
Mike, did you vote on that?
Mike, aye. Yep, sorry.
That's all right. I think I just missed it. Opposed and carried. Item 15, appointment of Committee on Preschool Special Education. Resolved that the Committee on Preschool Special Education for the 2020-2021 school year be appointed as follows in accordance with the provision of Education Law, Section 4410, to implement the provisions of Section 200.16 of the Commissioner's Regulations. Do I have a motion?
Christine,
Second,
Christine,
Christine. Questions or comments?
Nope.
All those in favor?
aye. Me.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Mike,
Mike, I
Michael,
usually go up to you, Mike.
I. Okay, all right. Thanks for the heads up. I won't leave you hanging. Appointment of subcommittees on special education. Resolved that subcommittees are established for each school for the 2020-21 school year to perform the function of the Committee on Special Education. Pursuant to the provision of Education Law, Section 4402, except when a student is considered for initial placement in a special education, special class outside of the student's school of attendance, or a school primarily serving students with disabilities, or a school outside of the student's district. May I have a motion?
I'll move, Patty.
Patty, you second it. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Patty, I.
Kelly, I.
Margie, I.
Christine, I.
Michael, aye.
Mike, I
Aye. Any opposed? And carried. 17, appointment of impartial hearing officer. Resolved that the superintendent of schools is authorized to appoint an impartial hearing officer for the 2020-2021 school year to maintain SCP timelines. May I have a motion?
Motion.
Kelly Rossi, second.
Christine,
Margie, second.
Christine Beach and Margie, sorry about that. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Kelly, I. Christine,
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Michael, I.
Mike, I
Opposed? Carried. Bonding of personnel. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following bondings for the 2020-2021 school year. You can see those in front of you. They have a motion.
motion to me.
Me, second.
I'll second it. Patty.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye, me. Aye, Kelly. Aye, Christine.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Michael, I.
Mike, I
Opposed? Carried. 19, consent agenda. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following for the 2020-2021 school year. You can see the consent agenda in front of you, 1 through 10.
So how does this, I don't see the slide changing, Tony. I mean, I've got it on my phone.
If you're looking at the Board of Education meeting slide, that generally won't change
Oh, okay.
until and then I think Michelle has some slides to present later.
Okay, I'm fine.
Otherwise, folks are just following along through the agenda.
Yeah, okay. Is there a way to do that so that you can actually see it when you're via Zoom?
Yeah, sure. We could actually have the agenda
I think that'd be
on the
great.
screen that you're seeing now.
Wasn't the agenda up before?
I keep looking at too, because I look at my phone and then I look at my iPad, but
Yeah,
iPad is for you guys, phone is to look at the agenda.
I'm doing the same thing, Mike.
Yeah, that'd be great if I could just see it on the iPad.
I can put it up there now. Sure.
Oh, look, there it is. Oh,
Perfect.
that's something else.
Oh, just changed.
It's item 19.
Now, you must have good eyes, Mike, to look at this on your phone.
It makes it bigger,
Okay, so
at least for me, because I'm old.
we're on item 19, consent agenda. And then you can see under the heading consent agenda, there are 10 items. May I have a motion? Me? Second,
Christine,
Christine? Any questions or comments, discussion in regards to the consent agenda?
In the facilities committee, the other committees are, the whole board is part of them. But the who are the board members that we're gonna put in there? Should we be doing that now?
Yes.
Okay,
You also want to confirm that you want committees of the whole for those other two committees.
okay.
We've had committees of the whole for the audit committee and the school district policy committee. I would propose that we continue that. I think we all need to be aware of that. I think those are the only two, correct?
Yeah, and then just, we need two reps.
I agree.
Two board representatives to sit on the facilities committee. And that meets, Tony, what, about 4 times a year?
Yeah, we're just about 4 or 5 times a year.
7:30 a.m. usually.
Would anybody like to serve on the facilities committee? I will do that, Tony.
I'll do it again if someone else wants to.
I could do it.
How many do you need to?
2, yes.
Okay, all right.
When does the facilities committee meet and what time?
We meet roughly 5 times a year, pretty evenly spread throughout the year. And meetings generally start at 7:30 and may go as late as 9.
Okay,
And as Kelly is sharing with Christine, at each meeting, we now do a walkthrough of each one of our buildings.
So far, Mike McCullough and Christine Shea have volunteered for that.
So there's your 2.
If anybody else would like to do that, I would step aside.
I would love to, but I can't right now, so.
Any other questions or discussion in regards to this consent agenda? All those in favor?
Patty, aye.
Hi, Christine.
Margie, I.
Michael, aye.
Like I.
Opposed? Carried. Item 20, end the reorganizational meeting. Resolved that the reorganizational meeting be adjourned and the regular Board of Education meeting be convened. May I have a motion? Denise, second, Kelly Rossiter. All those in favor?
Margie, I.
Patty?
Patty, aye.
Michael, aye.
Mike, I.
All those opposed? Carried. Item 21, so now we are into the regular Board of Education meeting presentation. This is Brandon, do you have presentations?
Just the COVID-19 quick little update. So as you know, a message went out at 5 o'clock today to staff and families in the district, just letting them know that we had a letter prepared to mail tomorrow, Tuesday the 14th, and a survey also will be posted to the front page of our website for families to take. And the survey basically includes questions about some specific pieces of information that we're looking to glean. As you've heard me say many times, it seems like the minute we put information out, it's outdated. And the letter is ready to mail, survey's ready. My message went out tonight and we got some guidance late today. So in perfect form, there we go. The survey includes gleaning the following: whether or not families will be sending their children in the fall if we are able to open. We're asking families to prepare a survey for each child because we do recognize that parents may look to treat children differently depending on their age and their medical history or background. We also are looking for transportation needs, including a willingness for families to transport their own children. We presumed that the guidance would have some heavy components around social distancing, and we were not disappointed when we saw that, or maybe I should say we were disappointed because it will be very difficult to comply with the level of social distancing required. And so we're just looking to gauge how we'll be able to do that on buses. And some of that would be contingent upon the willingness of families to assist us by transporting their own children. In addition, while this is a bit premature, we figured while the survey was going out, we would also look to determine if families have already made decisions about vaccination when one is available. So our families already thinking they will vaccinate, because it will, in my opinion, will likely be a requirement for school attendance based on the governor's previous stance on vaccines. Also, it could be that families are undecided, and that's an option as well. So as I said, this will give us some important information about our ability to socially distance here at school. As I mentioned before, some guidance did come out a little after 4 o'clock this afternoon from the state health department. So that would be considered the governor's information. I think I may have mentioned before that there were 2 groups working on guidance, the state education department, and they received a presentation from the interim commissioner today and put out some initial documents, but their final documents will be out later this week. At first glance, their documents are less prescriptive, but the governor's documents via the New York State Department of Health were very prescriptive, including things like if you are going to have physical education, going to have anything with singing or playing instruments that require air, like any wind instruments or instruments that you would blow into, the social distancing requirement increases to a 12-foot radius around a child. And as you can imagine, that will be impossible, even to have an ensemble in the auditorium. It would be impossible for us to create 12-foot radiuses around our kids. So we'll have to, start doing the work of determining what music could look like and what physical education could look like. There's other requirements in there, including specifying the wearing of masks, when and where, and the fact that face shields, which I think especially many of our special ed teachers and maybe teachers of younger students were looking forward to as an option so that students can see facial expressions, will not be sufficient unless you're also wearing a mask. So there's some pretty prescriptive stuff, and I'm just touching on a few items. Certainly, I haven't had a huge chance to dig into that guidance in great detail because it was just received about an hour and a half ago. So we'll continue to dig through that. We have been working on planning behind the scenes. And again, as I've mentioned before, I've had a reluctance to bring together a larger group, of which we have already established with willing participants, until we had guidance, because having some of those discussions in-house, they sort of become a big circle that begins and ends with, do we have to socially distance? And it's terribly frustrating. So what we've been doing is just some behind the scenes work of some scenarios that we could do based on what the guidance looks like. And we took another step this week in that I called in 2 subgroups. They were smaller groups just of school staff. I would say no more than 10 people. And I asked for people to come together that administrators designated as being very able to think creatively and have a good head for scheduling. And we did a lot of talking about what types of attendance patterns and cohorts could we create in the event that we have to socially distance. And if you haven't sort of put 2 and 2 together, the only way to socially distance at all in a school building, in a classroom, is to reduce the number of students in the room. And that means not all of the kids would be able to attend at the same time. And I'm sure this is no shock to anyone, as many states have already put out their guidance, and you're probably reading the same things I am, in that school districts are implementing plans where students will attend on a rotational basis. So that's some of what's happening with that. A couple of other things that came out in the guidance is that there was actually specific language about desks and surfaces being disinfected between use. So in the event that we have students at all moving from place to place, we have to make sure that we can do that. And interestingly, we cannot do it in the presence of students. You know, the first thing we thought of was, hey, what a great opportunity for our kids to help us with disinfecting, you know, and us all sort of owning this process and working together as a team. And it is literally spelled out in the guidance that we cannot disinfect in the presence of students, which will add another layer.
But
We
they
also
also say students shouldn't leave the classroom.
correct, which, you know, I mean, one of the things that people say, oh, well, the kids can stay in one room and people can come to them, which in some cases that could for sure happen. I think the biggest challenge is that, especially for our younger students, but boy, I'm going to tell you for middle school and high school as well, it's challenging enough for kids for us to hold their attention for long periods of time. And the recent research has been all about doing brain breaks and the mind-body connection, so that we're giving kids actual, you know, physical activities to do so that they can come back and refocus. And that's really challenging to do if you're saying kids will stay in one place and only the adults will move. So I have some real challenges about the effectiveness of having kids stay in one place all day. I can't imagine, especially in the elementary school, that being very effective. But as I said, even with older students. It's also spelled out very clearly by the guidance from the New York State Health Department that athletics are not permitted at this time. I know that I've asked you all to review a plan for a summer return to off-season workouts, and I'm asking you to consider approving that plan tonight, with the caveat in the plan that was added that we have to have permission by the governor, which would come, you know, by him and then through the State Health Department to actually enact that. So at this point, obviously, we won't be doing any summer activities, nor will we be having athletics when we return to school in the fall, at this point, as of today. The State Ed Department did have some important things that they reviewed regarding state education department regulations and what ones would continue to be in their, I'm going to call it COVID-19 form. And one of those is that we are under a 180-day requirement, and that requirement will be waived again for the coming school year to include virtual learning as well. So I mean, we all know that students will be sometimes here and sometimes virtual. And we also all recognize that depending on how our numbers trend, we may all be virtual again, as disheartening as it is to admit that. So as I started talking about before, planning has begun. The subgroups the last 2 days looked at scheduling patterns. We had a group that looked at the K-5 possibilities, and then another group that looked at 6-12 possibilities. We were thinking initially that 6th grade would likely follow the 7-12 pattern, but it may be easier for them to follow a K-5 pattern, but it was good to have that discussion. Our larger vetting committee, so once we have a skeleton plan or a draft plan, we'll bring together that larger committee. That committee has about 40 people on it, and that committee's role would be to review, vet, and improve our plan. We understand that any plan we put together and any plan that that committee vets will be flawed, because what we all want is for our students to return to school and have their lives return to normal. And that doesn't look like it will be happening at the current time or in the very near future. So tomorrow, Jean and I will be putting out a notification for that committee to come together on the 27th. We feel like we'll have a pretty good draft plan at that point from 3 to 5 p.m. And that is made up of parents, school staff, and some board members have volunteered to be on that group. And several of the parents that have come forward to volunteer are also members of the medical profession, which I think will be helpful to us. So that's what I have so far.
What about, you know, you keep hearing how the governor's going to look at different areas, you know, like, okay, upstate versus downstate and all that kind of stuff. So is this across the board for all of New York State that this is being looked at for every school the same way?
Yep, this guidance came out from the New York State Department of Health, and it was issued with a title, you know, K-12 return to school guidance. But Mike, the thing that I didn't mention is that the guidance is only if we can return to school. And I'm sure you're all reading the same articles I'm reading. The
Yeah, right.
governor will be making that decision sometime the week of August 1st to 7th. You know, I think because he put a date out, we will have an answer sometime during that week. I would guess it'll probably be towards the end of the week, because I think he is waiting as long as possible to determine how numbers are trending. If they're trending in the wrong direction, his decision may be that school doesn't open at all. But when it opens, we will all have to comply, because these measures are put in place to stop further infection. So even if you come together because you don't have many cases in your area, it's his belief, based on the data he's collecting and tracking, that if we don't use these measures, those numbers will go in the wrong direction, even if you don't have many currently.
He did make reference, though, to regional openings based upon that region being in phase 4 and a certain percentage of new infections being below, I think was 5%.
Correct. So the question I'm responding to is, will we all have to comply with the same guidance? Yes. But he may, I mean, it hasn't been his MO to want to open school here, but not there. I mean, we all saw that the last 3 months of the school year, that there were counties that had literally no cases, and there were other counties that were very heavily hit, and everybody was sort of under the same closure directive. That could change.
Are there any discussions by the governor, you know, for parents trying to return to work, but kids that are home, how that is going to be conducted? Like, how does that work? And you just have to deal with it. So you just have to figure out how to, you know, find babysitter
Correct.
and sufficient. Okay.
Michelle, has anything been,
And then I heard the Department of Education discussing that if a school doesn't open, then that money should not go to the school and go to somebody else.
I don't know what you mean. You mean the state aid that we would get?
Right. So the Department of Education, I just saw her on Fox discussing how that, hey, these schools should open. And if the school does not open, like all the private schools, for instance, Manly's Pebble Hill is going to open. It's a private school. How are they allowed to open, but we're not? Because they're a private school, and you know, you pay a tuition and you go to school there. So parents are going to probably start looking at alternate means to educate their children if the schools don't open.
That may happen. So I didn't watch her comments. I'm guessing you're talking about Betsy DeVos, but
Yeah.
I think what she's talking about is there's some federal money that's already been allocated, and
Okay.
she is wanting to make sure that an appropriate portion of that go to private and parochial schools. I think what everybody needs to understand is that when we say schools aren't opening, what we're really saying is buildings aren't opening. So schools are still functioning. You know, over 70% of our budget is the human beings that have to make sure there's continuity of education. So everybody's still working. Some of them are working here at the building and some aren't. But the money that's given from the state government supports those functions, whether the building's open or not. So I'm pretty sure she was probably referring to ensuring that the special money from the federal government is allocated sufficiently to those private and parochial schools that may in fact be opening. Some of their ability to be open will be based on the fact that they have low enrollment. And if that enrollment starts to increase, it may be that things change. Because you can socially distance pretty easy when you have 8 kids in a class.
Yes, you can.
And Mike McCullough knows a lot about that.
But Mike, that being said, Mike, so
Yeah.
I'm the principal at a parochial elementary school, and we belong to an organization called the State Office of Religious and Independent Schools. And we still have to follow what the governor, if the governor closes schools, we have to close. we can't choose to stay open. But what Michelle was referring to is because our numbers are so small right now, we're not looking at a alternating day schedule or a half-day schedule, because we can social distance with the kids that we have all day long.
So then it's true that, like, so if we are under closure, then a private school like an MPH or anything like that, they don't have the liberty to open brick and mortar if we don't, correct?
No, they cannot.
As far as I know, they cannot open, but they will have an easier time
Opening.
complying with these requirements. We have said repeatedly, not just here in Marcellus, but when I've spoken with my colleagues in the region, if we have to socially distance, bringing everyone back every day,
Not
that's
gonna
the end
happen.
of that discussion.
Yeah,
It's
it's not gonna happen.
impossible.
Has anything been discussed, just so for parents possibly to plan accordingly, like that? if
Yeah.
Decision is made, say, the first week of August, and if the school districts feel that they need more time to prepare the building or the busing or whatever the situation is, that maybe that 180 school day requirement might be adjusted or modified accordingly, or is that like whether we start in person or online, is it the day is the day and that year is expected in full?
Well, the 180-day requirement, as I said, is modified to include in-person or virtual. So if you remember how that works, if you remember, we had planned to have a spring break, and that spring break was removed because we had to continue instruction because it was a meshing. We talked about this, but it was a long time ago. There's a meshing of two requirements. One is that you have this 180-day requirement. And what's on the books is that the only time you can alter the 180-day requirement, because this has happened before. I mean, school districts have had massive flooding. There's been horrific, microbursts, or I lived through an ice storm in the North Country. We were closed down for 2 or 3 weeks right after Christmas break. But the forgiveness of the 180-day requirement is predicated on the fact that you have to use every other day available to you. So what that meant is you have to cancel any subsequent days that you were going to give off, like spring break, which is what happened to us. In the end, the governor recognized that he would allow students and staff to observe Good Friday, but the rest of that week, we needed to do continuity of instruction. So we would have to start off with a plan to utilize the days in our calendar virtually or otherwise. Kelly?
Michelle, I have a question. With this initial plan that you and the committee are working on, is professional development with distance learning and remote education included in that plan?
So we have a plan to do two things. One is to have an opportunity for staff to come into school and have a day of work time prior to our first 2 days of coming back. We also will be creating some online, some virtual modules so that staff can go through that and get some information. We also have a couple of days. We also have a couple of days that we come back ahead of the students, and we should still be able to do that so that we can offer an additional opportunity. So one of the things that we talked about administratively is that we learned a lot doing virtual schooling, and while everyone did their very best at trying to figure this out, there were definitely some practices that led to a more effective situation than others. And we've had a discussion about creating especially by building, because there's some nuances for different ages of kids, coming up with some processes and procedures that will be followed consistently. And some of that, just to sort of give you a picture, these are things that just need to be in place. It's not a matter of a decision. So one of the things we learned is that, kids having 8 Google Classrooms at a young age to try to navigate is really challenging. So we have to look at how do we reduce the sort of the craziness of having to juggle so much. We recognize that kids don't have a great ability of navigating using email effectively. That's something we've got to talk about and deal with. We talked about some processes for clearly posting, you know, agendas and assignments so that kids don't have to go digging for that. It's really clear. We talked about designating, when we put out work for kids to do, designating a prioritization so that if kids, you know, some of our family situations, parents can be right there helping kids along. There's other situations where both parents are working, they come home at night, they're exhausted and they now have to do schooling. So if they can have a sense of, hey, what's the top priorities? And if we don't get to this other stuff, it's okay. You know, that'll be helpful. We also talked about contact time. You know, what does it look like to have a consistent schedule so that kids know when they have to check in, when they have to be on a class in Zoom or Google Meet. And we will have to do that because one of the new requirements put out was that we do have to take attendance, even virtually. So we didn't really have to account for attendance in the same way this year, but that'll be a mandate going forward. So it'll be even more important that we have a way to track that with contact time. That's not an all-inclusive list, but we did some groups, parent groups giving feedback. I had some people reach out to me individually with feedback. And we also did some meetings with teachers actually giving feedback about what they noticed. And I think we'll be able to develop at least a better plan to move forward. So hopefully that helps.
All right, any other questions for Mrs. Brandner in regards to what we know about returning to school as of 6:50 on July 13th? Because I'm sure it'll change. Item 22, business, school breakfast and lunch prices for 2020, 2021. Resolved that the Board of Education approves 2020, 2021 school breakfast and lunch prices as follows. You can see them there. They have a motion.
Kelly motion.
Kelly, second.
Second, Patty.
Steve, any questions or discussion in regards to the breakfast and lunch prices? All those in favor? All those in favor?
Patty, aye.
Kelly, aye.
Margie, aye.
Christine, aye.
Michael, aye.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? Carried. 22.2, annual professional performance review, Marcellus Faculty Association. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the annual professional performance review APPR plan agreement effective September 2020 between the Marcellus Central School District and the Marcellus Faculty Association. And it further be resolved that the superintendent of schools authorized to sign the APPR plan agreement on behalf of the district. May I have a motion?
Yes, Patty.
Dean, any second? Any questions or discussion for Michelle? All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry.
If we are virtual, how does that APPR get done?
Good question. I've got to dig a little bit more into the guidance, but I believe there was a stray comment in there about making some provisions if we're virtual. So we don't have enough yet, but when we do, we'll have a discussion with our union and work something out.
Do you think that there will be something forthcoming regarding that?
I do. I do believe there will be.
I'm willing to come to observe you at home. All those in favor?
Patty, aye.
Kelly, aye.
Christine, aye.
Michael, aye.
Margie, aye.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? Carried. 22.3, issuance of bonds for bus. Resolved that the Board of Education authorizes the issuance of $113,063 serial bonds to pay for purchase of a transportation vehicle that was approved by voters June 16, 2020, as per the attached resolution. I have a motion. Steve, second.
Kelly.
Any questions or discussion? So that's a bond for a bus, correct, Tony?
Correct.
All those in favor?
Kelly, aye.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Christine, aye.
Michael, I.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? Carried. 22.4, approval of off-season conditioning plan. Resolved that the Board of Education approves an off-season conditioning plan. May I have a motion? Janine, second.
Kelly, second.
Kelly? So this is the plan that Michelle sent out a couple weeks ago. I'm assuming we're still going to vote on it, even though it may become a moot point.
Yeah, I resent that to you again, and it was included in the packet with 2 changes. One change was the caveat that we received permission from the governor prior to commencing, because the original guidance said as long as we were in phase 4, we could commence. And then second, Christine had suggested we add a note in there that parents would be contacted if a student failed screening. So we did add that caveat as well.
So I had a question under the facilities and athletic equipment use cleaning. Adequate cleaning will occur as follows for all athletic facilities prior to and between workouts to mitigate the spread of any illness. Who will be responsible for the cleaning and disinfecting?
It clearly won't be kids based on what we just received. We assumed that the coaches and kids would work on wiping equipment, and it will now fall on the adults. And it sounds like kids will have to actually exit during the cleaning.
So
I just want to have something in place in the event that we can do something. If you want my honest opinion, I
this,
think the likelihood is diminished.
this was scheduled to go into effect when
As soon as we were in phase 4, which was.
we are now.
Right,
I mean, we had to approve it.
correct.
So theoretically, it could go into effect tomorrow.
No, because the governor has said it cannot commence.
Well, I know that, but I mean, originally. it
Yes,
was going
originally.
into effect tomorrow.
Correct.
Any other questions in regards to the off-season conditioning plan? All those in favor?
Janine, aye.
Patty, I.
Kelly, aye. Christine, aye.
Margie, I.
Michael, I.
Mike, aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item 23, personnel. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the following personnel items. 23.1 through 23.7, correct? We have a motion.
Motion, Kelly.
Kelly, second.
Patty,
Patty, second. Questions or comments? All those in favor?
Janine, aye. Kelly, aye. Christine, aye.
oh, Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Michael, I.
Mike, aye.
Carried. 24, consent agenda. Resolved that the consent agenda consisting of the following items be approved. You can see those there, 24.1 through 24.7. May I have a motion?
Janine,
Janine? Second?
Margie, second.
Christine? Sorry, Margie. Any questions or comments in regards to the consent agenda?
No.
All those in favor?
Janine, aye. Kelly, aye.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Michael, I.
Mike, aye.
Oh, we got this down. 25, informational items. Discussion of the status of school board meetings relative to the most recent executive order.
So I sent everyone information about the governor extending the executive order, allowing for meetings to not be held in person. And I laid out a few options for you. I suppose there's probably other iterations that you might want to consider, but basically we need to make a decision prior to our August board meetings, how we want to function in the event that he extends that executive order again, because it does run out, I think, August 5th. I'm not remembering the date off the top of my head. But in the event that it's extended, we have the option to continue with virtual meetings, or we could have in-person meetings. And those in-person meetings, we would just have to make certain that we do not have more than 50 people in the room. We have to be in a space that could be socially distanced. And if we proceeded with that plan, if there were board members that were virtual and others that were in attendance, we would have to follow the same rules as previous to now, when people that were virtual, didn't have voting rights, and we had to also advertise their location as another meeting location. So for me, I think I think we either look to say meetings are virtual and we'll continue as we are, or meetings are in person and, we'll go forward as we used to go forward. I don't know if anybody else has some other iteration that they're more comfortable with.
So just to clarify, if a board member is remote, they will not be able to vote.
Correct.
If that executive order is not extended.
Correct.
Well, what likelihood is it that order won't be extended? It seems only logical that it will be, correct?
It's low, which is why I felt like Mike and I felt like we needed to talk about this, because we need to be prepared prior to August happening. I mean, that's been the hardest part through this whole time, is that you're getting information sort of after the fact of needing it. And I wanted to actually, for once, try to get ahead of something and make sure that we were prepared. So
Woohoo!
I thought, let's get prepared and decide. I mean, I think the challenge of deciding is that between now and August 10th, our numbers could be who knows where. And, there's a piece of me that says staying virtual is probably safer. Then we don't have to worry about exposing ourselves or bringing other people in. But there's another part of me that says, just go forward and make sure you follow the rules and limit the number of people here. So I'm sort of like 50-50.
So is our next board meeting before or after that executive order expires?
After.
It's after. So
I personally, if the order is extended that we can do virtual meetings, we should continue to do virtual meetings. Or, does that make sense?
Yes. Other thoughts?
How is it effective? Like today, there are 4 board members with you? Is that okay? I mean, so we could virtually keep doing what we're doing, but if people wanted to be in person, that would be okay?
Yeah, we will have to, we were working on getting a setup so that everyone could be seen. And
Right.
we were struggling with some of the technology. That's the only thing we would want to do, is just make sure everybody
Correct.
could see who was here and know who wasn't here.
Yeah, and
I'm sort of
from-
confusing myself, because I've had too many things go through my head today with all this guidance coming out. I believe it's okay if not everyone's present, as long as it's billed as a virtual meeting.
Okay,
You're not inviting the public in. Once you invite the public in, anybody who's not there from the board has to fall under the same requirements as before, because you're really not having a virtual meeting if you're inviting the public in.
right. And I don't know how Patty and Mike feel. I do feel, and I know that we weren't able to set up the LGI. It's very difficult for us to hear the members who are with you.
Right,
Yes,
I
it
think
is.
the LGI and the microphone system will help that.
That would be great.
clarification, is a quorum based on attendance or a quorum based on voting attendance. Like right now, we have 7 people, all 7 board members are in attendance.
Correct. And it would be the same as long as our meeting stayed virtual and the public participated virtually. You don't have to be physically in the room under that scenario as a board member.
I'm talking about if the order expires and we continue to do it virtually, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're not here, you can't vote.
Correct. And a quorum is still
Even though
4
we-
no matter what.
Even,
Yeah.
but we would have 7 people, 7 board members are in attendance, 4 physically, 3 virtually. So what is the, but if it were 3 and 4, would we have a quorum?
No,
Because
No.
we wouldn't be able to have a majority vote.
correct.
So then it seems most effective to leave things virtual.
To stay virtual then,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yep.
I
So
agree.
Christine is saying yes to that and Janine is saying yes. And Christine, you had mentioned something before. Can you share it again and I'll repeat it so it's
Sure, I
heard?
was just thinking that maybe we should keep it on the agenda for every meeting
Yeah.
to discuss as things
Good
change,
idea.
as the numbers change.
Yeah, we will have to keep it on the agenda because this is one of those things where the executive orders, now that an executive order almost lapsed, I mean, it came down to like hours before it was renewed. That's the first sign that we're gonna have to really pay attention to this because before we'd taken for granted, if everything's still closed and there's all these restrictions, they'll keep rolling that executive order forward, but it was a little bit of a nail biter this last time. So yeah, we'll keep it on the agenda and every single time we'll at least say, because I think it'll be important for the members of the public, we'll at least say to them, hey, this is the status right now. This is the status of the executive order and this is how we're proceeding. Okay.
What
so-
is the,
oh,
how is
sorry.
the attendance been? Can we tell? Is there a difference in attendance? Do we have people watching? Do we
Very
know?
few. Very few. It's
Okay,
Tony, I think it's been around 4 people. I don't know if you know, Tony, off the top of your head, what the highest.
Oh gosh, the highest was the meet the candidates.
Right.
Other than that, I think the highest we've had is 9.
So the highest we've had is 9, with the exception of the Meet the Candidates night. We had a decent chunk of people. So you can see who's logged in. I mean, who's.
okay, I
how
was
many-
just curious, because
Yeah.
I was wondering if we had better attendance online.
That's what I would think.
Well,
know.
9 is better.
Yeah,
I mean, when you're talking about maybe 3 normally, so
right, so
I don't-
I was just, because,
not 20.
right, I mean, if we have more people on online meetings than we do in person,
Sure.
that would be an
right.
interesting thing to know.
Yeah, and maybe when winter hits, it'll be, people won't have anything to do.
There you go.
It was a joke.
Any other questions or discussion in regards to board meetings? And so I think it's 2 things came out of that I really, Christine, when you said to keep this as a placeholder on the agenda, at least until things get back to normal. And then secondly is to constantly monitor the executive order to see if there's any changes made to that. Item number 26, resident comments. Public expression of Board of Education meetings is encouraged, and a specific portion of the agenda shall provide for this privilege. In most instances, the board shall reserve judgment regarding questions and concerns that are brought to the board's attention in a board meeting, as it is typically not prudent for the board to make instantaneous determinations. In addition, any issues that are brought to the board's attention do not require a formal determination by the board, but instead are most appropriately addressed by the superintendent or persons designated by the superintendent without further board action, in accordance with policy 3220. Are there any resident comments at this time? No resident comments? Item 27.1, enter executive session. Resolved that the meeting in public be adjourned and an executive session be convened for the purpose of discussion of collective negotiations, employment history of particular personnel, and the superintendent's contract. May I have a motion?
Me?
Motion, Margie?
Margie, you got the second. Time is 7:09. May I have everyone in, all those in favor? Thank you.
Patty, I.
Margie, I.
Michael, I.
Mike, I.
Opposed? Carried. Yeah, this is.